Blake Lively wants everyone to think it is over. But if it really was, she would not need to beg the judge to call it final. Because when you truly win, you do not need the court to write it down for you. You walk away, and the victory speaks for itself. But this week, Blake's team decided to keep talking. And that says more than any filing ever could. Her lawyers just submitted a new motion in federal court, asking Judge Louis Lyman to officially enter final judgment in the countersuit that Wayfarer Studios brought against her. On paper, it looks procedural. In practice, it feels like theater, a stage-managed performance dressed up as professionalism. She is asking the court to stamp her dismissal as permanent, even though her own anti-SLAPP and Section 47.1 fee motions are still pending. Those are the same motions where she is trying to make Wayfarer pay her legal costs after the judge threw out their complaint. This is not closure. It is an attempt to choreograph the ending before the next act begins. And that timing could not be more revealing. The filing came right after Judge Lyman ordered everyone involved, including the New York Times, which also asked to finalize its own dismissal to explain why the docket should stay open. Suddenly, Blake's team moved with remarkable speed. After months of delays, procedural arguments, and press statements about fairness, they are suddenly sprinting toward the finish line. The tone of urgency does not sound like confidence. It sounds like someone terrified that the story might not end on their terms. Because that is what this is really about. It is not law, it is optics. The illusion of victory dressed as resolution. A way to make headlines read that she won while quietly ignoring that the case still has open parts left behind it. Every detail of this motion reads like an effort to preserve an image rather than pursue justice. It is the kind of filing you make when you are desperate to freeze the narrative before anyone changes it. This is the final act in a year-long show that has never been about truth so much as presentation. Every filing, every quote, every leak has been part of a script. The character she plays is the woman who fought back and won. But this motion proves the performance is still going. Because real winners do not need a judge to declare them final. They already are. When you look closely at the wording, it is almost pleading. Polite? Yes. Respectful? Absolutely. But the subtext is loud. They are not claiming closure, they are begging for it. They want the word final next to her name before Justin Baldoni's appeal lands. They want that word to circulate in headlines before the conversation shifts away from her control. Because once the appeal begins, everything changes. The spotlight moves. The narrative belongs to the appellate judges, not to the press. What Blake's team will not say publicly is that this dismissal was procedural. The judge found Wayfarer's complaint lacked enough specific facts under Rule 12b-6. That means it did not meet the threshold for a defamation claim. Not that the accusations were false. It is a legal technicality, not vindication. And that distinction matters. It is the difference between being proven right and being spared the next round. But that nuance does not fit inside a headline. So instead, the team is fighting to cement the appearance of victory. Her team is trying to frame the narrative in concrete before the next phase begins. It is a public relations move with a legal signature at the bottom. They call it efficiency, but it reads like image maintenance. The kind you do when you sense the applause fading and the critics preparing their notes. The letter's tone is steady, measured, almost calm. But underneath it, there is tension. You can sense the discomfort hiding in the punctuation. The repetition of words like final, dismissed, and complete sound less like statements and more like self-reassurance. If this really were over, she would not need to say it so many times. The calm language is there to cover the anxiety. The whole thing reads like an actor smiling through closing night, pretending not to hear the whispers about a sequel no one asked for. The more you look at the sequence of events, the clearer it becomes that this is about timing. Every filing in this saga has been carefully timed to shape perception. When Blake's side wants to distract from criticism, they file. When a deposition goes badly, they file. When the press starts to move on, they file again. This motion is no different. It arrived just in time to create the illusion of resolution before Justin Baldoni's team can speak through their appeal. It is one final attempt to hold the mic a little longer. There is something fascinating about how quiet her public posture has become. Months ago, she was issuing statements about courage and safety. Now her filings talk about efficiency and closure. That is not growth, that is fatigue. When the message changes from empowerment to paperwork, you can tell the story is running out of oxygen. And that exhaustion leaks through in the details. The same lawyers who once filed sweeping accusations are now asking the judge for administrative housekeeping. They are moving from offense to maintenance. That is the clearest sign of a narrative losing momentum, because when you control the story, you create moments. When you start losing it, you look for ways to pause the frame. There is a psychology behind this pattern. People who crave control tend to mistake finality for security. If they can convince everyone that something is finished, maybe the anxiety will stop. Maybe the uncertainty will go away. But the law does not care about feelings. The court will still review the open motions, and the appeal will still happen. Pretending the story is over does not make it true. It just makes the ending feel staged. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's side has stayed silent. No interviews, no leaks, no drama, just patience. That silence is not weakness. It is composure. It is the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the facts will speak for themselves. And that contrast could not be stronger. On one side, endless filings, media spin, and polite panic. On the other, quiet certainty. That imbalance tells the real story without either side saying a word. When the appeal begins, this illusion will face its first real test. Appeals are cold and procedural. They do not care about reputation. They care about what is in the record. And the record here is messy. It includes inconsistent statements, missing context, and contradictions between filings. It includes the parts that PR cannot rewrite. Once those pages land on an appellate judge's desk, the storyline about victory will start to look fragile. You can almost see the nerves behind Blake's silence now. The fiery confidence from early in the case has turned into restraint. The photo-ready statements have been replaced by vague references to process. It is not hard to imagine the meetings behind closed doors, full of talk about optics and timing, about how to get the word final into the headlines before the next wave of scrutiny arrives. That kind of calculation is not what real closure looks like. It is what fear looks like when it wears a designer suit. It is ironic. The same lawsuit that was built on the theme of being silenced has turned into a scramble to silence itself. The team that claimed to be fighting for truth is now asking the court to make everything final before that truth is tested again. It is poetic in a way. You start a story about speaking out, and it ends with a letter begging for quiet. The truth is that this motion is not about ending the story. It is about freezing it in a frame that flatters her. The goal is to have that word final sitting next to her name forever, regardless of what happens in the appeal. It is the same strategy you see in Hollywood when a movie underperforms, but the studio still buys full-page ads saying #1 opening. You can call it success as long as you say it loud enough. But the law does not care how loud you are. The law waits. It waits through PR cycles and photo shoots and statements to the press. And when it finally speaks, it does not care about optics. It only cares about the record. That is what her team cannot control. They can manage the timing, the tone, and the press, but they cannot control what the appeal might reveal. The performance works for now. It convinces the casual observer that the case is over, but anyone paying attention knows it is not. The pending motions, the appeal window, the unanswered questions all linger in the background like a shadow that refuses to leave the stage. And that is the thing about illusions. They only work until someone turns on the lights. When that moment comes, when the appeal begins, and the record is reopened, the audience will see what was hiding behind the curtain. They will see that this was never closure. It was a pause dressed as an ending. A story that looks complete because someone was in a hurry to call it that. Blake Lively wants everyone to think it is over. But if it really was, she would not need to tell the court, the press, and herself the same thing over and over. She would not need another motion to prove a point. Because real victories do not require repetition. They speak for themselves. Justin Baldoni does not need to perform. He does not need to race against a headline. He is waiting. And waiting is the one thing his opponents cannot do. Because waiting means accepting that the truth will come out on its own time. And when it does, no amount of choreography will be able to cover it. The illusion of victory still looks polished, still sounds confident, still plays well online. But time has a way of pulling the curtain back. When the appeal arrives and the filings are read without the gloss of performance, this so-called final victory will look like what it really was all along. A show designed to distract from the silence before the truth speaks. And that is how this act ends. Not with applause, but with realization. The audience finally sees the trick. The illusion fades, the lights come up, and what looked like a finale turns out to be the intermission.